Tensions are extremely high at the border between Ukraine and Russia. Civilians are afraid what lies ahead. Russia has deployed over 100,000 troops near the Ukrainian border. Panic is rising among civilians. Of course, the question also is, what about pro-Russian fighters? What happens to them and their families if Russia invades Ukraine? We bring you a ground report.
As Russia amassed over 100,000 troops near the Ukrainian border on Tuesday, civilians and pro-Russian separatist fighters in Russia's Luhansk region said they feared what might lay ahead. A Russian military build-up within the reach of Ukraine and a barrage of threatening rhetoric have rattled the West in recent weeks, sparking fears Moscow may use military force to stop Ukraine from moving any closer to the West and NATO. Emergencies Ministry employee and Luhansk resident Rostislav, who did not provide his surname, describes living on the front line.
We live so badly. There is no water. Thanks to the military, they gave me some wood. Do you see how we live here? You're on the front line now. No one knows what happens at night. They will smash us, and that's all. Where should we go? We live here. We were born here.
Alexander, former chef-turned-separatist fighter, hopes future generations in Luhansk would not experience conflict.
First of all, for me, it means people will breathe out and live a normal life as well as their children. I am young. I don't want the students who are studying now to take my place. I understand what it means, and I don't want people to see it.
Russia's ruling United Russia Party will ask the country's leadership to deliver unspecified military supplies to two pro-Moscow separatist regions in eastern Ukraine. Senior lawmaker Vladimir Vasiliev said on Wednesday. The statement came amid global tensions over a Russian troop build-up near its ex-Soviet neighbour. Vasiliev said the move was needed to ensure the safety of Russians living in the regions.
And for the latest on ground, we have Natalia Gumenyuk who joins us from Kyiv for more on the story. Natalia, welcome on India Today. What's the situation on ground? Is there a real apprehension of a conflict breaking out?
So, of course, there is apprehension of the conflict because nothing had changed since the moment we have 100,000 troops on the Ukrainian border from the Russian side. And also for 8 years, Ukraine is in the conflict with Russia. A part of the Ukrainian territory had been occupied 8 years ago. However, now this conflict is so far, fortunately, diplomatic. As there are the demands from Russia towards NATO, towards the US. But on the ground, of course, people feel some kind of anxiety because Ukraine is in the international press. But to speak about like some development, no, there is no panic neither in Kyiv nor in the major towns, no closer to the area of the conflict. People pursuing their normal life. Of course, they are following the news closely because the threat is there. It's intelligence sources. It's not a bluff. But I cannot say that there is something really happening on the ground in Ukraine that, like people going to the shops buying the food or things like that. Of course, the government is on alert. The army is on alert because in the end, it would be up to Ukraine to defend itself in case something happening. But it's about looking at different scenarios. We cannot really say that it happens in the end for sure.
Okay. So there is this understanding that Ukraine will have to defend itself. As far as the US is concerned, or as NATO forces are concerned, US says they have 8,500 odd troops on standby. NATO is talking about additional aircraft and ships in the region. But are you thinking of boots on ground or only sanctions against Russia?
So, no, there is no even in naivety that there would be ever is the American or NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine, because it just against the rules of NATO.
Yes.
However, because the demands are to NATO and to the US, of course, Ukrainians consider it's just to ask for the support, because Ukraine is a big European country, but it's way smaller than Russia. So, in particular, defensive weapon in case of the incursion, not for anything proactive, is definitely needed. But the most are also the demands on the sanctions in case something happened. Also saying that if we're speaking about the rules, we do understand that in this particular case, Ukraine won't be ever admitted into NATO. Because, and that's exactly the point which is used by Moscow, because the former post-Soviet countries who joined the NATO, there are no threats to them.
Okay.
So there are threats to the countries whom NATO won't defend because they are not the part of the alliance. And I'm speaking about Ukraine or Georgia. But in this moment, we're speaking about Ukraine.
For joining me on India Today, Natalia, many thanks. I also want to bring into this conversation Ambassador Ajay Malhotra, India's former ambassador to Russia, and Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain for a military appreciation of the situation on ground and its ramifications. Ambassador Malhotra, you've served extensively in Russia. You know the crisis and the situation. What we see now, is this posturing, or is this far more serious than posturing, the stance adopted by Russia and by the US?
Well, it's an attempt to find a solution to what has been a pestering problem for now close to more than 30 years. When the Soviet Union was dismantled in 1990-91, there was a understanding given that NATO will not expand into the ex-Soviet republics except for the three Baltics.
Yes.
And that is now well documented in declassified documents that are there, which you can find from German sources, French sources, British sources, American sources. So this is an attempt to put on record a commitment that they thought was there, which Gorbachev thought was there, and I can vouch for that. I have personally asked him this question on at least 2 occasions, that NATO will not expand into the ex-Soviet space, less the Baltic. But now we find there was a proposal in 2008 to take in Georgia, and we saw what happened thereafter. The Soviets moved into, and so far Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are parts of Georgia, remain independent. And the same with Ukraine. There was a proposal in 2008 at the Bucharest NATO summit to try and draw Ukraine in, which didn't move forward. But even at that stage, President Putin had warned that if you move on this, don't forget about Crimea, which has since been absorbed by Russia, and there could be issues. Now, if you see what has happened, the pressure of putting the troops along the border has led to discussions and exchange of documents, which is what the Russians hope would be the direction which things would go.
Okay.
The Russians have given written proposals for negotiation, which are extreme proposals, which will have to be negotiated. And just now, the Americans, through Blinken, have given counter proposals. They gave some in December after the December 7
but no commitment on
summit
NATO.
that they had.
But no
and now they're
commitment
given
on
a
NATO.
whole set more for consideration.
Yes, and does that mean that we are likely to see an escalation in tension? General Hasnain, 1 lakh troops on ground, another 27,000 aviators and sailors in Crimea, some troops in Belarus for an exercise. All of this just posturing, or could this lead to an escalation? Because even in Ukraine, it's now being said that these troops do not mean a massive invasion, but the tension remains.
See, Gaurav, of course, Ajay is the real expert here who knows Russia and East Europe backwards. But let me tell you, historically, if you look at it, the Russian system, or the good old former Soviet system, was everything was done in a big way. When it came to the invasion of Hungary in 1956, it was done in a big way. It happened in 1968. I remember when I was 15 years old, when the Soviet Union moved into Prague with as many as 4,000 tanks into one country at that particular time. So everything Russia does it big. Now, Russia has been tolerating, I would say, to a great extent, the attempts by NATO, by Europe, to try and push into the near abroad region of Russia, with the attempts to try and put finishing touches to what was the end of the Cold War. And the Russians are now pushing back.
Yes.
They've pushed back since 2014. And they took Crimea, as you saw, although Crimea still officially belongs to Ukraine. But what is important is that the Russians have fought a hybrid war, one of the most effective hybrid wars anywhere in the world. They've fought it in Ukraine for the last 7 to 8 years.
Yes.
Now will they convert this hybrid war into something conventional on the ground because they've reached the end of their tether? Well, to my mind, I don't think so.
Okay.
Because
Ambassador Malhotra. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Ambassador Malhotra, the hybrid war or the cyber war or war by other means that General Hasnain talks about, do we see more of that? Because the indications are Americans, will they actually put boots on grounds now that they've said they won't, they've indicated they won't? NATO appears to be divided, Europe appears to be divided. How do you see this pan out in the coming weeks?
Well, first of all, American boots on the ground, not going to happen. They've just exited from Afghanistan, and you have your midterm elections to the US Congress, which are going to take place. So I don't see that happening at all. There could be some sort of shootout, which could inadvertently happen or due to somebody trying to engineer a situation up there. But on the whole, I think this would pass off rather peacefully because both sides have come to the negotiating table now, have exchanged drafts, and both sides will try and see how far they can go. Even the latest statement from President Putin a couple of days ago says that we should take into account the security concerns of all the states in that region. So clearly they moved away from a more extreme position, and now it is time for serious negotiations and diplomacy to move forward on this. So I don't think anything's going to happen, even though inadvertently somebody could engineer some sort of trouble out there. And there are people who have that sort of intention in mind. But I don't see a conventional war taking place.
Okay.
If you see, the Russians have been able in their near abroad to get the situation that they wanted through many other means. You look at Syria,
Yes.
you look at Iraq, you look even at Libya, you look at South Ossetia and Georgia, compared to, you look even at Afghanistan, compared to where they could have been without deploying troops. They have been maneuvering their way to find a situation which keeps their interests in mind.
Fair enough.
So,
we have
in
this
terms of
report
going into war, I don't think it'll happen.
Okay, we have this report coming from ground zero. There is apprehension, there is fear. We bring you a ground report from Ukraine.
As many as 100,000 Russian troops have remained amassed at the Ukrainian border. Despite warnings from US President Joe Biden and European leaders of serious consequences should Putin move ahead with an invasion. The negotiations between Russia and the US have reached a deadlock, with the US rejecting Moscow's primary demand of not having Kyiv join the NATO military alliance.
We've taken this step out of prudence. We hope those forces don't have to be activated for deployment. But if they are, we will be ready. We're also continuing to coordinate with our European allies and partners on severe economic sanctions to hold Moscow accountable for its actions.
But experts believe that a full-scale conflict between the two sides is unlikely.
I think neither side, nor the Russians, nor the United States, is seeking a fight. But the problem is that the Russians are not going to wait for another whole year for their concerns to be addressed.
The fresh crisis in Ukraine started with the Russian threat of consequences should Ukraine decide to become a member of the NATO military alliance. The first real problem emerged in November 2013, when then Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych joined the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union rather than signing the Ukrainian-EU agreement. This led to massive clashes called the Euromaidan movement. Eventually, the Ukrainian President Viktor was removed. In 2019, the Ukrainian parliament amended the Ukrainian constitution in order to allow the country to join NATO and the European Union. The Ukrainian pro-West tilt has become a core concern for Moscow and therefore the current military build-up at the border. According to Global Firepower 2021, Russia is way stronger than Ukraine. Therefore, Kyiv needs support from NATO. How is Russia looking at fighting Ukraine at the West? Russia today has carried out one of the largest military deployments in Europe after the Second World War. It has deployed over 100,000 soldiers around Ukraine, threatening the use of conventional force. Cyber war, the opening salvos of a ground offensive, will be a massive cyber attack on Ukraine's cyber infrastructure. Multi-axis attack. Russian forces could attack from Belarus, Russia, Donbass and Crimea. A multi-axis attack encircles defending forces and captures territory. The ground offensive. Russia will use artillery, armored formations of tanks and infantry combat vehicles and air power to destroy defenses, capture territory and encircle defenders. While Russia is absolutely determined to take on any overtures by the West towards Ukraine, the NATO and Europe are a divided house. Crucial in Germany's decision not to send military help lies in Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. It is the Nord Stream 2 which connects Russia directly to Germany. It offers Moscow some leverage because it bypasses Ukraine and Poland, which currently benefit from transit fee. Ukrainian president has called the pipeline a dangerous geopolitical weapon of Kremlin. The US, UK and EU have all warned Russia that it will face further crippling sanctions if it invades its neighbors. For India, it is a tightrope walk. If Moscow is sanctioned, then India's defense relations with Russia could take a hit. With both Russia and the US key strategic partners of India, taking sides is not an option. Also, any conflict in Eurasia could further deepen Russia's ties with China and divert the world's attention from Chinese aggression across the Indo-Pacific. With Natalia Gurmek from Kyiv and Geeta Mohan in Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
And we will talk to Ambassador Ajay Malhotra and General Hasnain about the impact in this part of the world, especially whether this pushes Russia closer to China in case there are sanctions. What does it mean for India? But before that, let's quickly listen in to Vasyl Shevchenko, former member of the Ukrainian parliament, explaining the ground situation.
So Vasyl, tell me please, what is the situation in Ukraine now? Can you feel the tension in the country?
To be honest, I cannot say exactly what have changed the last time, because as you know, we have been living in the so-called war conditions for a long time. Against Ukraine was addressed the new type of war, and now is we know this it like war in the information sphere and using against Ukraine.
Let me quickly bring in Ambassador Malhotra. Ambassador Malhotra, do we see a situation, should this escalate, sanctions or America threatening India with Katsa?
In terms of India, no, I don't think so, because Katsa and its application, if you're talking about for the S-400, I think that is now sorted out. That is more or less behind us now. And the increase, in case there's a breakout of war, which I do not think will happen, but in case it does due to some localized situation, the sanctions on Russia, they have not had any major impact so far. Let's be clear about that. If you see, in fact, Russia's dependencies on oil and gas has gone down. Russia has become a major agricultural exporter now, simply because it couldn't import from the European countries, France and Germany in particular. So the situation is not so bad. They have happily handled all these sanctions. I don't think they have a problem with a few more.
Okay.
But I don't think they're looking to go down that path. They don't want more sanctions. Their preferred situation is improved relations with the West. The sad part is right now, Russia's relations with China are its best ever, and relations with USA are its worst ever.
And
so
which is
it's
not
in our
very good
interest
for...
to bring the two of them together.
Yeah, which is not very good
USA
news
and
for
Russia.
India, General Hasnain. Russia-China relations improving and any tension with America would only push Russia and China closer. Not good news for India.
See, Gaurav, one thing is very clear. This is all about brinkmanship. It is not going to lead to anything conventional in terms of a conventional war. But tension is going to continue through this year and perhaps beyond, right? So America's avowed intent of trying to refocus its entire attention to the Indo-Pacific is something which is going to take a major hit. If you remember, the Americans have done the same thing with the Middle East, where they signed the Abrahamic Accords to try and settle issues here so that they could focus on the Indo-Pacific. Now you find all of a sudden things coming back because of the Russian pressure on Ukraine. The Americans are not going to be looking to push the envelope beyond a certain stage. I think now at the moment is a very crucial period in which diplomatic overtures are being made by the United States and by NATO to Russia. The Russians are not reacting negatively to it. I think things may just about sort themselves out. But the tensions which have started in Europe have the potential of creating more problem for us in the Indo-Pacific, where the Chinese and the Russians are like, as Ambassador Malhotra said, their relationship has never been better. We remember 1969 when the Russians and the Soviets and the Chinese fought over Damansky Island on the river of Suri, and they killed thousands of Chinese with their Grad P rockets at that particular time.
And they put two divisions before 1971 war on the China-Russia border.
Absolutely. So things have changed drastically since then, of course, and the Russians and the Chinese are hand in glove today to a very great extent. But having said all this, I think the situation is moving towards some kind of a reasonable resolution temporarily, if nothing else. Okay. And therefore, I agree with Ambassador Malhotra.
Fair enough, but Ambassador Malhotra, the last 30 seconds on the broadcast, but I quickly want to get your view. If world attention is focused on Ukraine and Russia and America is focused there, Europe is focused there, could that give China an opportunity perhaps to misbehave either in the Himalayas or in Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh or Arunachal Pradesh?
It would be very silly of them to do that, because that would bring all the focus of everyone onto them. And I think they will get the just response that they deserve, not only from the Indian army, but everyone else would rally around to see that the Chinese are taught a lesson if they were to try any adventure out there.
Fair enough. Very heartening to hear that, and that's exactly why it's such a pleasure to have you, General Hasnain, and Ambassador Ajay Malhotra here on India First, free, frank and fearless. A quick break at this stage.